Alright, so we've been talking about trig ratios, and hopefully after yesterday you've had a little time for that to sink in and able to approach that with maybe a little more positive attitude and open mind today, now that it's not brand new. We are going to do the same thing we did yesterday, so if you already understood it and knew what was going on, today should be an easy day. And if you were stuck yesterday, then hopefully seeing it again and presented in a different way will help you understand it a little better. Couple of things. Yesterday, everybody sent two versions of videos, one that was made by me and one that was a Khan Academy link. I know First Block had some technical difficulties with that, but if you checked all of your emails, I explained all of what was going on and what was required yesterday. So, hopefully you went back and looked all of that. If you didn't, you may want to do that to make sure you did everything you were supposed to. Hopefully both of those helped. If you were stuck, hopefully you watched both of them. If you were stuck and only watched one, go watch some of the other ones. That may help you out a little bit. If you got it yesterday and you understood it, then it's going to be the same thing today. I did send you a link last night asking you to join Edpuzzle. And what it is a website / program that allows me to use a video and to ask questions in the middle of it and to make comments, things of that nature that'll help you going along. He explains in that video a little differently than I do, and that may be helpful for you. You don't have to do the way he does it, but if you were struggling with the way I showed you yesterday, sometimes people find that way a little easier. You're welcome to use either one. They're both the same way. They're just different ways of thinking about it. And if his way makes more sense than my way, then feel free to use his. I'm fine with that. The goal here is to get you to understand trig ratios the best we can. Do make sure you actually do that, because one thing about Edpuzzle is it allows me to see who logs in and what questions they've answered, how much of the video they've watched, all of those things it allows me to see. It also doesn't allow you to skip the video, so you do have to watch the whole thing. It's about 5 minutes long. It's nothing like the ones I make, but it's just a short little video with some questions and some comments mixed in to try to help you out a little bit. So if you haven't done that already, take a chance to do that. If you have friends in the class or you know of people in the class who have a tendency to skip things because they think they know what's going on, you may want to give them a nudge and say, hey, you actually need to go there. He's going to see that, because you are going to get a participation grade on that based on obviously whether or not you tried to answer those questions. If you pay any attention at all to the video, you are going to be able to answer those questions. It does allow you to backtrack and watch that last section again so you can answer the questions. So if you missed it, feel free to go back. He says all of the answers in there, or I say all of the answers, one or the other. There's some of them he's saying, some of them I comment on, but if you're paying even a little bit of attention, you'll be able to get that. Also, as you're going through these videos, these things are just like what I would say in class. I use the same materials, I use the same words. Some of us are using that to our advantage and some of us are not. Please make sure you take the time to actually focus and listen and pay attention with that. If you have any plans at all to go to college, you will see more of these. So it's a good idea to get used to it now, where you're not paying for the education. You have all your money invested in that. It's a little easier to learn that lesson now. I will, barring any major disaster, be back on Monday, and we'll be glad to take all of the copious amounts of questions I'm sure you have. Some of you have been emailing me, and I've been getting back to those as quick as I can. Some of them have even been during your class period. Depending on what we're doing in my class, we do take breaks, so I try to answer questions on breaks as much as I can. But obviously I'm not going to be goofing off in class and try to answer your questions when I'm supposed to be doing important stuff. So I will get to those questions. Email them to me. Some of you have been good about that already, some of you haven't. But do email those questions to me. Hopefully between yesterday and today and all the stuff we're doing, that being able to find those trig ratios, be able to set them up and find for that missing side will be a lot easier for you. Quick review, you've probably read this while I was talking, so I'm not going to go over a whole lot. Just a couple of reminders for sine, cosine, and tangent. There's the ratios that you've got to set up. Reminder about opposite and adjacent, that those move depending on your reference angle. If your reference angle moves, opposite and adjacent move. The opposite side is the side that's not touching your reference angle at all. If it's touching your reference angle at all, it is not the opposite side. Okay? Your adjacent side is the side that is touching your reference angle, but the one that is not the hypotenuse. If you recall from yesterday, and even if you don't, it's still true, the hypotenuse never moves. It's always the one across from that right angle, directly across. I believe in the video that I have on Ed Puzzle, he talks about bisecting the angle, cutting that in half, and the one that gets cut, the side that gets cut in half with it, is your hypotenuse. If you can just remember it's the one across from the right angle, you'll be good. That's the important part of it. But if you don't have that hypotenuse, that automatically makes it where you're going to do tangent. It's the easiest one to see because that hypotenuse is not involved. Do remember that the adjacent side is never the hypotenuse. Okay? The hypotenuse is always the hypotenuse. It's never the opposite side. It's never the adjacent side. The hypotenuse is always the hypotenuse. Don't mix that up. Don't try to make it something else. So I'm going to take a second and I'm going to have you look at something that I gave you yesterday. Let me bring that up. Alright, so this is the link I sent you yesterday. If you actually open that up, it's talking about an introduction to trigonometric ratios, talking about that sine, cosine, tangent that we were talking about. It starts off with being able to label hypotenuse, opposite, adjacent, that kind of thing, but it eventually goes into actual videos. That first one is a set of notes. There's right there, that little piece of paper tells you it's a set of notes. The star down here is actually practice. If you're not familiar with Khan Academy, you can actually log in and get user points, all that fun stuff, and track all of this math that you've been doing. If you look over here, there's tons of stuff we can do with right triangles and trigonometry. We're not worried about all of that right now. Right now we're worried about sides, okay? And being able to find those missing sides. And that's some of the things he goes through in those examples. Let's see if it'll let me actually do this here. So clicking on that first notes page there, that's what it gives me. It's something you can scroll with. You can read all of those things. They've got some pictures in there, have some vocabulary marked. There's some practice questions down there at the bottom. You can actually click on the video and open that up. You actually open that video up there, and the guy's name is Sal. He goes through talking about labeling, talking about sine, cosine, tangent. He goes over SOHCAHTOA that I gave you yesterday, and just the basic setups through all that. So you may have used that, you may have not. Some of you, I went back and answered questions and asked you if you saw this video and you didn't even remember getting it. So if you missed that, you may want to go back and check that. Alright, let's go into some of the work for today. If you haven't done your Ed puzzle yet, at this point right now, I want you to pause the video. I want you to find that email from me talking about clicking the link and going to Ed puzzle. And I want you to watch that video first before you go any further here. So if you need to, stop this video. Please do not have my video going the same time his does, trying to get two things done at once, because then you're not going to be able to understand anything that's going on. And for those of you that have stuff going on in the background and you're paying attention to it instead of me, shame on you too, because that's part of the reason you're having trouble. Stay focused. The first two I've got here look a lot like one you did yesterday. Don't get those mixed up, because it'd be real easy to not pay attention and have the problems I'm doing right now on the wrong sheet, especially if you didn't do it yesterday. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by zooming in here, look at my first problem. anytime you've got these, sometimes, or most of the time, what I recommend is that you start by labeling what you have. If you watch that Ed Puzzle video like I told you to before you started this section, you saw he labeled what he had as well, and he went ahead and labeled all three sides. If you want to at least label the two that you're given is enough for me. So we know this is our reference angle here, 27. If we're going straight across, that's the opposite side. And if we look, this other side down here is actually touching that angle. If it is touching that angle, and it is not the hypotenuse, because the hypotenuse is the one across from the right angle, then it is the adjacent side. Most of you that I talked to yesterday, which was not everybody, but those of you that I talked to yesterday said that you got that part, the naming the sides, understanding the opposite, the adjacent, the hypotenuse. You weren't sure where to go with it from there. So what we need to do is we need to first figure out what we have. Well, it gave me X there, which is my opposite side, and it gave me the 10, which is my adjacent side. So I have opposite and adjacent. If you look at that page I gave you, those notes we did yesterday, it's on there. There's only one trig function with opposite and adjacent in it, and it's tangent. So I'm going to set up tangent. Well, maybe I will if it'll write here. There we go, tangent. And I always put my reference angle beside it. I showed you that yesterday. The videos show you having that reference angle as part of it as well. And then what you do is you set up your ratio. Just like it is on that paper that gives you tangent is opposite over adjacent. So tripping on apples, if you watched that yesterday and heard that. If not, you can go back and see what in the world that reference was to. So I'm going to set up my ratio, which is opposite over adjacent. Opposite is X over my adjacent side, which is 10. Now, depending on which way you liked, depends on how you solve this. I'm going to do it both ways for at least a couple of them. You don't have to do both ways. Please pick the one that works for you and do it that way. They're both exactly the same thing, just different ways of thinking about it. So, this one, I'm trying to get X by itself, right there. I've got 10 below it, so that's dividing by 10. So I'm going to get rid of it by multiplying by 10. If I do it on one side, I have to do it on the other. So those guys cancel out, and I'm left with 10 tangent of 27 degrees equals X. Now, if you remember from yesterday, I told you when you type that in your calculator, don't worry about trying to put the degree symbol in there. Your calculator does that for you. Now, if you watched the Ed Puzzle video first before you started this, like you were supposed to, he goes over how to make sure your calculator is in degree mode. If you are trying to do this without a calculator, you are completely doomed because you do not want to know how to do this without a calculator. It is possible. You don't want to know how to do it because it's ridiculous. Mathematicians don't do it. I don't do it because it's ridiculous. The calculator is far superior. Borrow a calculator if you need to. Just make sure I get all my calculators back. I had one that didn't wind up in the box yesterday. I don't know which block it was in because it was back in the corner. But please make sure those all get returned. So, now I'm after that side story there. I've gotten to this point. All of that was to explain where we are. Now, this part right here just gets typed in your calculator. Do 10 times the tangent of 27, and it's going to give you X. I'm not going to give you all of the answers on this because I know some of you would sit there and do nothing and wait for me to give you the answers. I'm not going to do that, but I am going to show you how to set it up and how to solve it. So all that you have to do is punch it in the calculator. If you can't punch that in the calculator, you're not paying real careful attention. I have faith in everybody's ability to do that. Now, same problem again. Not going to make you do it both ways, but I promised you I would show you both ways on here. You still have that initial setup. Tangent of 27 degrees equals opposite over adjacent side. The way the Edpuzzle did it was he goes ahead and sets up a proportion. If you read my comments, this is just like when we did similar triangles that we cross multiply. And if you watch that video, that's exactly what he does. He's cross multiplying here. And then we just write down what we have. So in this case, we have 10 times the tangent of 27. So 10 times the tangent of 27 degrees equals 1 times x. 1 times x is just x. You notice my end result is the same regardless of how I think of it. So it doesn't matter which one I do. Take whichever one works best for you. Do that one. I do need you on these setting up this ratio. I do need you to give me x equals a number over here, and I'm going to take a second to highlight my instructions. Told you yesterday you do to 3 decimal places unless you're told something different. Here you're being told something different. You round to the nearest tenth. That is 1 decimal place. In the Edpuzzle video, again, I comment on the fact that he uses the approximate symbol instead of equals. We are rounding. It would be appropriate to use the approximate symbol, but if you use equal, that's fine too. I told you that's a pretty common thing, that when we have a rounded answer that will be given the equal sign. It is more correct to say approximate, but for the purposes of this, it is fine to say equal. So if you're going to continue doing that, that's fine. Just wanted you to remember that he did that. Going through a couple more of these. I'm going to try to go through a few without distraction here. So again, we're going to start by what we have. We've got the opposite sides not touching our reference angle. We have our adjacent side that is touching our reference angle. And we have our hypotenuse that's directly across from our right angle. We again look to see what we're given here. We have labeled adjacent and opposite. There's only one trig function with opposite and adjacent, and that's tangent again. So we're going to set up tangent of our reference angle, which is 25 degrees, equals opposite over adjacent. Tripping on apples, okay? Opposite is x, adjacent is 10. So, if you did it the way I did yesterday, we're trying to get rid of that 10 on the bottom, so we're going to multiply both sides by 10, because we were dividing, and now we multiply to get rid of it. That cancels out. So I'm left with 10 times the tangent of 25 degrees equals x. If you prefer the Edpuzzle method of that gentleman's method, I've forgotten his name, or I'd use it. He has the same ratio, tangent of 25 degrees equals x over 10. And then he sets up a proportion, just puts it over 1, doesn't change anything. And then he cross multiplies. So I wind up with 10 tangent of 25 degrees equals 1 times x, which is x. And again, all you have to do is type that in the calculator and round to the tenths place. You can do that. Don't forget to give me over here x equals, or if you prefer, x is approximate to. Either one is fine. Just pick one. Do them all the same. Number 3. I'm not going to do all of these with you, but I am going to do several examples. So, number 3. Our reference angle, 39 degrees. We're going to start by labeling what we have. We have the hypotenuse. We know we have the hypotenuse because it's directly across from the right angle. Alright, so that's the hypotenuse. Directly across from my reference angle is my opposite side. And the one touching my reference angle that's not the hypotenuse is my adjacent side. So I look at the two that I have given. In this case, I'm given the adjacent side and I'm given the hypotenuse. So I look at my trig ratios at the ones that has adjacent and hypotenuse, and that's cosine, ka, and the so ka toa, or call another hippie in that one I gave you yesterday. So we're going to set it up cosine of my reference angle, 39 degrees, equals set up your ratio, adjacent over hypotenuse, x over 7. I'm going to multiply by 7 on both sides to get rid of that, because it's on the bottom. I then have 7 cosine of 39 degrees equals x. And for those of you that prefer it the other way, cosine 39 degrees equals x over 7. Set up my proportion. I cross multiply. I get 7 times cosine of 39, so that's 7 cosine of 39 degrees equals 1 times x, which is just x. Don't forget when you punch that in your calculator to give me x equals or x is approximate to. Again, doesn't matter which one, just pick one. That's just type it in the calculator, guys. Just type in 7 times cosine 39 degrees Right. Ooh, got a little funky there. Here we go. So again, I'm going to start with my reference angle, 46 degrees. I'm going to start by labeling my sides. So directly across, I've got my opposite side. Directly across from my right angle, I have my hypotenuse. The only side that's left, but it's also the side that's touching my reference angle and is not the hypotenuse, is my adjacent side. Again, to figure out which trig ratio I use, I look at the ones I'm given. I'm given the opposite side and I'm given the hypotenuse. If I look at my trig ratios, the only one that uses opposite and hypotenuse is sine. That's the some old hippie. So I'm going to do sine of my reference angle, 46 degrees, equals opposite over hypotenuse, so 8 over x. Now, I'm going to multiply by the one on the bottom over here so that I can get it off the bottom. So times x times x. It makes those x's go away, and I'm left with x times sine of 46 degrees equals 8. Now this one, I don't have x by itself yet. Anytime x is the one that's on the bottom, over here, anytime x is the one that's on the bottom, you're going to have an extra step. It's not a harder step, it's just an extra step. So what I need to do now is I need to divide. And I'm going to divide by sine of 46 because that's what I want rid of on this side. Sine of 46 degrees. Divide both sides. Sine of 46 degrees. That cancels out. So I'm left with x equals 8 divided by the sine of 46. if it'll cooperate here. There we go. It's good enough. Now, again, when you go to write your answer, don't forget to give me x equals or x is approximately, depending on your level of exactness you're preferring. Now, because I said I would, I'm going to give you the other method as well. So when you're still going to set it up, sine of 46 degrees equals 8 over x. And then what he does is set up a proportion where you're going to cross multiply. So we're going to have sine of 46 times x. So x sine of 46 degrees equals 1 times 8, which is 8. Notice we still wound up in the same place here, and we're still going to have to divide by sine of 46 degrees to get rid of that. So we're going to divide by the sine of 46 degrees. Divide by the sine of 46 degrees. Those cancel out. And I'm left with x equals 8 over the sine of 46 degrees. All of these, you've got 3 steps. Determine your sides. Set up your ratio. Solve for x. Every single time. Determine your sides. Set up your ratio. Solve for x. Every single time. You're always going to multiply by what's on the bottom. If you do that as a proportion over here and do it that way, that works. If you multiply up here, if you multiply by the one on the bottom to get it over to the other side, it's going to work either way. It doesn't change no matter which way you do it. So there is a back to this. It's going to be the same kind of thing. Same 3 steps. Determine your sides. Set up your ratio. Solve for x on all of those going through. You've got plenty of time to work on these, so take your time. I can help with that, but it's those same 3 steps over and over and over again. If you're really struggling, you're stuck. I'd be willing to bet there's at least one person in your class that understands what's going on. Ask them for help. If the sub has an issue with you asking for help from a classmate, they shouldn't. It's in the lesson plan for them to allow that if necessary. Asking questions. I also put very clearly that you're not to work together on these going through. I really want to see what you know how to do. And you working side by side with somebody tells me what one person knows how to do. Because 9 times out of 10, what happens is that one person does all the work and the other person does all the writing. I want you to both know how to do this. You're saying, well, I can't do it without somebody. Then you need to say that real carefully, that you listen to it. You don't know how to do that. You can't do it. I need you to know how to do it and to be able to do it on your own. I'm fine with you getting help. I'm not okay with you having somebody do it for you. And I know you say, well, they don't do it for me. I just work together. I need you to get practice doing it by yourself, because you're going to have to do this by yourself on a test. So getting help is fine. Working with someone is not okay. Your next worksheet is more of the same. It's all solving for that missing side. It's all that same setup. I'm going to do 1 or 2 of these just for the sake of saying that I did some on all of them. It's the exact same setup. Nothing changes. So I start with my reference angle, 72 degrees. I start labeling sides. Across from my reference angle, I have my opposite side. Across from my right angle, I have my hypotenuse. The side touching my reference angle without being the hypotenuse is my adjacent. Now I determine which trig ratio to use. I'm given the adjacent and the hypotenuse. That tells me I'm going to use cosine, because it's the only trig ratio that uses adjacent and hypotenuse. Now I'm going to write cosine of my reference angle, 72 degrees, equals my trig ratio, adjacent over hypotenuse. Adjacent is 6, hypotenuse is x. So I'm going to have 6 over x. I'm going to multiply by the one on the bottom. So times x to get it off the bottom. That's my goal, is to get it off the bottom. So now I'm going to rewrite what I have. X times cosine of 72 degrees equals 6. Now, this is one of those that has an extra step because x was on the bottom over here. So now I have to divide by everything that's not x on that side. That's cosine of 72 degrees divided by cosine of 72 degrees. And what I get when I'm done, because those cancel out, I get x equals 6 over cosine of 72 degrees. If I do my proportion method, it's going to be exactly the same way. And I'm going to set up that initial ratio exactly the same. I'm going to write it as the cosine of 72 degrees is equal to 6 over x. And we can set it up as a proportion, put it over 1, and then we just cross multiply. We're going to get the same answer, the exact same work. Whichever one's easier for you to understand is the one you need to do. There's not an advantage of one over the other unless it's just for your own peace of mind. I'm going to do this one down here. So I'm going to start by labeling. So I've got my reference angle of 49 degrees. I've got directly across from that, I have my opposite side. Directly across from the right angle, I have my hypotenuse. And my side touching my reference angle that's not the hypotenuse is my adjacent side. I determine which sides I'm given, which in this case is the opposite and the adjacent. The only one that uses opposite and adjacent is tangent. So I'm going to start with tangent of my reference angle, 49 degrees, equals opposite over adjacent. So the opposite side is 14. My adjacent side is x. So I'm now going to multiply by the term on the bottom, which is x. So I multiply by x, I get times x, because if I do it to one side, I got to do it to the other. Those cancel out. Rewrite what I have now. I have x times tangent of 49 degrees equals 14. Now, because x is not by itself, because x was on the bottom over here, that means I got that one extra step. And I'm going to divide by everything on this side that's not x. So tangent of 49 degrees. On this side, tangent of 49 degrees, because if I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other. There we go. Didn't want to cooperate there. So those cancel out. Now I'm left with x equals 14 divided by the tangent of 49 degrees. Again, that's ready to type in your calculator just like it is. Don't try to type the x, just do 14 divided by the tangent of 49 degrees. Round to the nearest tenths place. Again, that's in your instructions up top. I know I told you go 3 decimal places unless you're told otherwise. In this case, you're told otherwise, so go to 1 decimal place, and it's ready to type in your calculator just like it is. There is a page as well. If you will do yourself a favor, and you can cross out 17. That's for those of you that watch the video. If you miss that, then you get to do 17. Have fun with that. It's not that bad, but as a little reward for those of you that watch the video all the way through. You don't have to do that one. I know it's not a big reward, but it's a reward nonetheless. All right, all the way through this, it's the same 3 steps. Just to recap for you: identify your sides, set up your ratio, solve for x. It's always going to be multiplied by that bottom term. If there's a number as the bottom term, that's all you have to do, and then punch it in your calculator. If there's an x on the bottom, you have to do that, and then do one more step and divide by everything that's not x, and that'll get x by itself. And it's those same steps every single time, over and over and over and over again. And that's the reason we did this instead of doing the new topic today. We'll hit that new topic on Monday when I'm there. And if you do have questions, as I've said before, you can email me. I will get back to you as quickly as I possibly can. I know some of you have concerns because you've done all this stuff while I was gone, but it's just like having me there, except unfortunately you don't get to ask questions. That's the only challenge. You're very independent on this one. But as I said, that's very much a skill they like in college, is that independent learning, that self-taught learning. So a little bit of a taste of college ahead of time. I hope that this is at least a little clearer than it was yesterday. If it was clear yesterday, great. If it wasn't, hopefully this fixed it. And I will see you guys on Monday. Have a fantastic weekend.